In 1324, a king walked into Cairo. He wasn't there to conquer, he wasn't there to negotiate. He was on his way to Mecca. And he gave away so much gold, to the poor, to merchants, to strangers on the street, that he single-handedly crashed the Egyptian economy. The price of gold collapsed by 20%. It took 12 years to recover. From one man's generosity. On a trip he took for religious reasons. His name was Mansa Musa. He ruled an empire larger than Western Europe. He commanded more gold than any person who has ever lived. And almost nobody knows his name. Today we are going to answer two questions. How did one man build the richest empire in human history? And how did everything he built disappear within 100 years of his death? But before we get to Mansa Musa, we need to talk about the man who came before him. Because Mansa Musa was never supposed to be king. In 1311, the ruler of the Mali Empire, a man named Abubakari II, became obsessed with a question. What lay beyond the Atlantic Ocean? He was not a man of small ambitions. He sent out 200 ships to find the answer. One came back. The captain described enormous currents, like rivers in the middle of the ocean, that had swallowed the rest of the fleet. Most rulers would have stopped there. Abubakari II was not most rulers. He ordered a second expedition. This time 2,000 ships. He appointed his deputy, a man named Musa, to rule the empire in his absence. And then he sailed west into the Atlantic Ocean. He was never seen again. Some historians believe the fleet perished at sea. Others, and this is not as fringe as it sounds, believe Abubakari's ships may have reached the coast of South America over a century before Columbus. We will never know. What we do know is this. The deputy left behind, the man told to hold the throne until his king returned, eventually accepted that his king was not coming back. And so Musa became Mansa, king of the richest empire on earth. To understand what Mansa Musa inherited, you need to understand what the Mali Empire actually was. At its peak, it covered 500,000 square miles. It ruled over 20 million people. It stretched from the Atlantic coast in the west to the Great Bend of the Niger River in the east. From the edges of the Sahara in the north to the tropical forests of equatorial Africa in the south. And it was built on two things: gold and salt. The Mali Empire sat at the crossroads of every major trade route in West Africa. Every caravan crossing the Sahara had to pass through Mali's territory. Every merchant moving gold from the mines of the south to the markets of North Africa paid taxes to the Mansa. Every gram of salt moving from the desert mines of Taghaza down to the cities of the Niger taxed. Mali didn't just mine wealth. It taxed the movement of wealth, which is a far more powerful position to be in. And then there was Timbuktu. Today we use Timbuktu as a phrase meaning the middle of nowhere. In the 14th century, it was one of the most important cities on earth. A center of Islamic scholarship, with universities and libraries that attracted scholars from across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. At its peak, Timbuktu had a student population of around 25,000 in a city of roughly 100,000. 1 in 4 people was a student. This was not a kingdom of savages sitting on a pile of gold. This was a sophisticated, literate, deeply organized civilization. One of the most advanced on Earth. At a time when much of Europe was still recovering from the Black Death. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every devout Muslim is called to make at least once in their life. He did not travel quietly. His entourage numbered 60,000 people. He brought with him 12,000 enslaved servants, each carrying 4 pounds of gold bars. He brought 80 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold dust. He gave gold to every poor person he passed. He gave gold to every city he stopped in. He built a mosque every Friday in whatever town he happened to be. When he passed through Cairo, the Egyptian gold market collapsed. The price fell by 20% and didn't recover for 12 years. Word spread across the Islamic world and then beyond. Who is this king? Where does all this gold come from? In 1375, 50 years after Musa's pilgrimage, a Spanish mapmaker sat down to draw the first detailed European map of West Africa. He drew Mali at the center. He drew Mansa Musa on his throne, wearing a golden crown, holding an enormous gold nugget in his hand. That map, the Catalan Atlas, set off something Mansa Musa never intended. European powers became obsessed with finding the source of Mali's gold. Portugal sent ships down the African coast. Spain sent explorers west across the Atlantic hoping to find a new route to African riches. The entire age of exploration, the voyages, the colonies, the conquest of the Americas, was partly driven by European desperation to find the gold that Mansa Musa had so casually given away in Cairo. One man's pilgrimage, one act of generosity, set in motion the events that would eventually colonize an entire continent. Mansa Musa could not have known that. But history rarely asks permission before it changes direction. Mansa Musa died in 1337. He left behind the largest, richest empire in African history, and not a single successor capable of holding it together. The collapse did not happen overnight. It happened slowly, then all at once. First came the succession crisis. Mansa Musa's son took the throne, but within 4 years, Timbuktu was raided and burned by warriors from the east. The message was clear. The empire that had seemed untouchable was suddenly very touchable. Smaller states that had paid tribute to Mali for generations looked at the burning city and made their calculations. They stopped paying. They started raiding. They started laving. From the south, Mossi cavalry attacked Mali's trade towns. From the north, Tuareg warriors seized the salt mines of Taghaza, the very mines that had funded Mali's armies for centuries. From the east, a new power was rising. The Songhai Empire, which had once been a vassal state of Mali, began absorbing everything Mali was losing. And then came the final blow. Not from a rival army. From a map. The same European curiosity that Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had sparked eventually led Portugal to find sea routes down the African coast. Routes that bypassed the Sahara entirely. Routes that bypassed Mali entirely. The trans-Saharan trade routes that the entire empire had been built to control suddenly had no traffic on them. The merchants went around. The gold went around. The taxes stopped. An empire built on controlling the movement of wealth had no answer for a world that simply moved wealth somewhere else. By the late 1400s, Mali had lost most of its northern territory. By 1500, the Songhai Empire had absorbed nearly everything that remained. By the 1600s, the Kingdom of Mali, once the largest empire in the world, controlled a small patch of land in the west. A shadow of what it had been. A memory. So here is what we are left with. The wealthiest human being who has ever lived built an empire that educated scholars, connected continents, and produced gold that shaped the entire known world. He was so rich that a single act of generosity on a pilgrimage crashed the economy of Egypt for 12 years. And within a century of his death, it was gone. Not because of one catastrophic mistake. Not because of one bad king or one lost battle or one wrong decision. But because of something more insidious than any of those things. Because the world changed and the empire didn't. The trade routes that had made Mali untouchable became obsolete almost overnight. The succession that Mansa Musa never properly secured unraveled everything he built. The map he accidentally put himself on gave his enemies a destination. The final mistake of the Mali Empire wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was the slow failure to adapt to a world that Mansa Musa himself had, without meaning to, set in motion. There is one last thing worth sitting with. Mansa Musa was almost certainly the wealthiest individual in all of human history. His empire was one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the medieval world. Timbuktu's universities were producing scholars, while much of Europe was still organized around feudal serfdom. And yet, most people have never heard of him. Most history books give him a paragraph, if that. Ask yourself why. Because the answer to that question tells you something important. Not about Mansa Musa, but about who gets to decide which empires we remember, and which ones we allow to disappear.